Business Diplomacy Today, the podcast about international relations and geopolitics from a business perspective. We help you anticipate the changing political and societal trends that influence your business.
Welcome. My name is Matthias Katon. I'm your host. Business Diplomacy Today is sponsored by the Indo-German Center for Business Excellence. The center is a think tank, research center, and network that connects people and organizations interested in business relations between India and Germany. As an academic institution founded in 2021 at Frankfurt School of Finance and Management, it is independent and impartial, but always close to the real world. To find out more about the center, please go to indogerman.center, and you can also find this link in the show notes. In today's episode, we will talk about business disruption and change. And my guest today is Christina Raab. Christina Raab is a distinguished figure in the realm of business innovation and transformation. Christina holds the pivotal role of market unit lead for Accenture across Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, and she is an integral member of Accenture's Global Management Committee. Her expertise lies in aiding clients from diverse sectors through intricate business transformations, with a particular emphasis on fostering new value through the synergy of technology and human creativity. Apart from her primary role at Accenture, Christina is an active vice president of the German IT Association called Bitkom, and she's also a vice president at the American Chamber of Commerce in Germany. She also contributes her vision and leadership as a member of the board of trustees of Econsense, the Forum of Sustainable Development of German Business, and she holds positions with the Senate of the German Academy of Science and Engineering, acatech, and she's a board member of Generation CEO. Christina boasts a master's degree in business administration and business Italian from the University of Passau and calls Munich her home. That was a long CV, so we'll put that in the show notes for everyone who was not able to catch every detail of that pedigree. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about change, disruption, and there is this saying that nowadays change is the only constant. So my first question to you would be, given that, how do you measure change, or how do you define it, and how do you measure change at Accenture?
I think this is a super important question because I think we all agree that we are going through a period of many changes happening in parallel. And this creates a lot of uncertainty and fear with some people. So I think it's important to go from fear or feelings to facts. And this is how we have created the Accenture Pulse of Change Index. This is how we measure change. And we actually look at 6 different components of change, or drivers of change, if you want to say so. And this is, of course, technology is one very important component. It is talent, so availability of people. It is about economic changes. It's about environment changes. It's about geopolitics. And it is about consumer and social changes. And what we actually do is we take these 4 areas of change and analyze how they impact decisions that companies take. So how it impacts labor productivity, foreign direct investment, or IT spend. And this is how we capture, like from a scientific perspective, change. Plus on top, we regularly talk to C-suite executives, just recently to more than 3,800 executives across the globe, and ask them about their perception of what drives change in their area of business. And this gives a quite comprehensive picture of what change is and what the components are that drive change.
I mentioned this sort of truism that is often stated that change is the only constant. From your experience in preparing these reports and doing research in this field, would you say that the pace of change and the breadth of change has accelerated over the past couple of decades, or is this just something that we have this intuitive feeling but isn't actually true?
what is important about this change index, that it objectively shows that change has enormously accelerated over the last 4 or 5 years. Just to give you that example, if you look at the index for the last 4 or 5 years, so from 2019 to 2023, the index shows 183% of change, the index. Now, is this a lot? Is this little? I think it's interesting if you compare to 2019, where the index of change is 5%, which is pretty much indicative for the previous decade. So currently we see a change index bigger than 30% per year. So if you look at 2023, it's actually been 33%, which is enormous, which is a lot of change, and it's objective. And by the way, if we look into the trends, talk to the executives, there is no expectation that the speed of change will slow down, will decelerate. So there will be a continued high amount of change for the next couple of years. That's what our analysis shows, and this is also what the executives confirm in our conversations.
Now, if I understand that correctly, and also based on what you said with percentages, what you're trying to do with the pulse of change is that you said objectively you try to quantify change. So from a methodological standpoint, I'm curious, how do you achieve that? Because, I mean, some of the factors, they are quantitative in nature, so there it's more obvious, I guess, but others also seem to be far more qualitative. So how do you get around that conundrum and get to this quantified change indicators that you mentioned?
So it is true, but if you double click, for example, on, let's say, geopolitical challenges. I mean, if you then break it down, so what is actually a geopolitical change? It then breaks down into supply chain challenges. It breaks down into energy prices and the impact on investment decisions you take. So by breaking down these big trends into more quantifiable areas of that trend or within that trend, it then actually enables you to measure how much this impacts investment decisions that have been taken by companies. And I think this is a very important starting point, because I think it nails down the change, it quantifies the change, but we should never forget this is a starting point for discussions. It's about reflecting what this means for short and long-term planning, what it means for being prepared to change constantly, for being resilient. So I would see it as a conversation starter of where is change coming from and how do I react as a leader in a company to these potential changes.
You mentioned the areas that you focus on, and we talked about the pace of change accelerating. Is there also a change in terms of the areas? Can you say that, in the past there was more change in a particular area, now this has shifted to another of those areas, or is it pretty much constant? The change is constant all across the board?
It is shifting. And if we look at 2023, the most important and fastest area of change is technology. And I think we all have seen that artificial intelligence, and specifically the rise of and the spread of Gen AI, has driven enormously the change that is coming from technology. So that's the clear number one. No matter whether you look at a scientific assessment or you talk to the perception of executives across the globe. So this is the absolute number one. So in the year before, so 2022, it's only been number 4, technology as a change. While back then, talent has been a main driver, or the geopolitical change has been a main driver. So there is change in the different, so in the priority or the strength of the different factors and how they drive change. And by the way, we foresee that technology will continue to be the main driver for 2024, because we now get into a situation where applications around Gen AI will no longer be just experimentation, but it will actually go into scaling, into industrialized application. So this will continue to be a large factor for driving change.
When you talk to business leaders, maybe your clients or maybe others that you meet, do you have the impression that this change is seen more as an opportunity, or is it seen more as a threat?
So it is overall very much seen as an opportunity. And I think this, to me, is very encouraging, that in many of the conversations, top executives realize the complexity and how difficult it is to navigate. At the same time, they feel confident that by adapting, by creating new products, by shaping new ways of interacting with customers, with retaining their team, building their talent, it is a huge opportunity for them. So more than half of them are absolutely convinced, despite the challenging economic situation overall and globally and specifically in Germany, there is an opportunity for them to grow and to build their business. At the same time, they equally say, well, I know this is coming, I know it's an opportunity, but I need to work on being prepared to face that. And that's basically across the different factors, be it investing more into technology, but also investing more into talent, being more adaptive and sensitive to geopolitical changes. So there is a lot of awareness, there is a lot of, opportunity in, but at the same time, there is also action required, I believe. And probably the next 18 months are pretty much determine a lot of the future of the companies out there today. So are they able to grasp these opportunities, or are they struggling to do so? And I think this will change the dynamic in the market, and we will see new leaders arise that are able to build on these opportunities.
I sometimes wonder, and obviously there's companies and there are leaders and leaders, and not everyone thinks the same. But sometimes I have the impression that both in the private sector, but also in government spheres, the approach is really more reactive than proactive. So we take whatever happens, and that is the issue of the year. So we had the pandemic a couple of years ago, and suddenly everybody talked about, the dangers of such pandemics, about supply chain disruptions. Everything went from, just in time to just in case, and all these discussions. Now everybody is talking about generative AI and the disruption that comes from that, but nobody's really talking about what's going to come next. So are we really, maybe as humanity, one could even say, are we proactive enough, or are we not too often just talking about the things that are most on top of our minds right now because they are in the public discussion at this very moment?
I think it's a bit both, because obviously there is so much change coming, and part of it is, I think, indeed hard to predict. That doesn't mean we cannot be prepared for it. And I think this is where the difference is being prepared, being resilient to react to a crisis, like basically no matter where it comes from. And let me be more specific. We see a lot of investment currently going into data and how I can use data, process data, and this goes down to artificial intelligence, but not everything you do with data is artificial intelligence. There is a lot of analytics, there is a lot of prediction you can do. So in these times of uncertainty, it is super important to have like your radar out, to look at the data, be able to analyze, to work in scenarios, understand how you need to adapt the entire value chain of your company to the changes that are coming. And yes, the actual change that is coming might not be the one you predicted, but what is important is you have a solid basis to understand and then to react and see a change not as a project with a beginning and an end, but I think in current times, and we talked about the pulse of change and the speed of change, is that mental model of change is here to stay and build a resilient organization, resilient processes, like many companies are doing right now, looking into options, for example, for their supply chain. And I think this is here to stay. So this focus on how balanced am I, constant risk assessment, and to actually be able to react as soon as possible.
I think nobody would doubt that in theory. And I mean, we're based here at a business school. That is, a lot of what we teach here is also around those things, that you have to be willing to reinvent yourself. You have to be willing to do some Schumpeter style creative destruction. Even when you're very successful with your company, you have to be willing to kind of kill your functioning business model in exchange for, being on top of things for the next thing. Now, in reality, that is hard to pull off. And we all know the examples of the Kodaks of the world, or the Blockbusters, or all those companies that were once extremely big and mighty, but they failed to foresee changes that were coming, or they could not believe that they could be disrupted by those changes. Do you see that happen again? And which sector maybe do you think will be disrupted the most by these artificial intelligence changes, if there is any particular that you can single out?
Well, I think first of all, it's, disruption is happening all the time. It's here all the time. But yes, it is accelerating. So there is more and more change happening all the time. As we look at the data now, and I mean for artificial intelligence, GenAI, it's only the beginning. I mean, it's a couple of months, a couple of quarters. The big thing is still to come. But what we see today is that all industry, all functions will be disrupted by GenAI. There is literally no industry we can think of that will not be impacted. The first ones actually that will be impacted, that will change a lot according to our studies, is actually companies that work a lot with text, numbers, and specifically this is banking, it's capital markets, it's insurance, and it's also the software industry that we believe will change first. We'll see an impact very soon, but we believe that all the other industries will follow. So it will be a disruption that will affect everyone. And I think if we will look back in 10 years from now, we will somewhere be between shocked and amazed how much it has changed. And I think that's just exciting, and it's a great future we will look into.
Yeah, I agree. It is very exciting. Also sometimes scary. Let me ask about another sector, which is consulting, the area that you work in. Do you think that will also be affected? And do you think in 10 years from now, maybe the pulse of change will be written by AI?
I deeply believe that consulting, advisory, and software industry will be absolutely disrupted. And we are having, first trials and tests of what artificial intelligence, GenAI, can do for us. And by the way, we're working on it for many, many years. Let me give you a couple of examples. Coding, just basic coding, we believe can be done by GenAI. Writing test cases. So how do you test the software that you've done? You can do that already today. You can work on how do I solve tickets? So requests coming in from users that, go from simple, I want to change my password, to complex things that happen. So we have come to a point that in a test environment, we can have a performance of GenAI that equals more or less a software engineer with 5 to 6 years of experience. And I mean, this is massive for what will happen in the software industry, but obviously this will also apply to what's happening in classic advisory. A lot of the research that we do today manually in the future can and should be done by artificial intelligence. A lot of prediction, a lot of what if analysis, I think can be supported by artificial intelligence. I think it's also a great opportunity to combine a lot more than in the past, even more than in the past, advisory and technology. I think it will come together. It will be like one thing in many spaces.
Yeah, an absolutely fascinating topic. In one of the recent episodes, I spoke about the AI Act, the EU AI Act, with a guest. So all of our listeners who are interested in those topics, maybe look up that episode as well, where we talked about a lot of similar issues, also a little bit about the risks, obviously, and the attempts to regulate them in one way or another. I would like to talk a little bit about going back to the change monitoring that you do, the Pulse of Change, about the 6 factors. And obviously they're connected. They cannot be seen in isolation. And I'll just, since we are talking about AI, there's one quite obvious connection I think that's going on, is that the inherent conflict between the West and China, or the US and China, one of the fields where it's playing out is in the field of technology, where both sides, if you may say so, are trying or are juggling to get into the pole position when it comes to controlling and developing those technologies. How do you look at the interconnections between those fields when it comes to your analysis?
Well, they are largely interconnected. And just take how demographics is changing, the availability of qualified talent, especially in the Western world, as we want to call it. So there will be a great shortage of talent. At the same time, if you look into consumer and social as one of the trends, is that there is an increasing confidence of employees, what they're asking for, because they know it's not many of them. So you can be pretty straightforward with what you're looking for, what you would like actually to have. And then it's also connected, if you look into technology, where Gen AI might be able, or automation, by the way, robotics, that might help us to overcome some of that shortage that we have in labor. So they are all connected, which I think sometimes, makes things even a bit more complex and challenging. But at the same time, I think one can also help to solve some of the other challenges. If you combine them, if you apply, for example, technology to help solve the generational issue, the labor shortage that we look at. So you absolutely cannot separate them out. They are happening in parallel. They are accelerating each other, but sometimes one can also help to solve the other, which I think is a great opportunity as we look at these different changes and trends.
Yeah, obviously labor shortage is true in large parts of the Western world and will start, I guess, to become a problem also increasingly in China, that is beginning to have its own demographic issues. However, that's not universally true, obviously. I work a lot with in India. The Indo-German Center that we have here in Frankfurt is the sponsor and the host of this podcast. And there is quite the opposite. So there we have a country that is still a very young country. It has a growing population and it has the opposite problem, that even with pretty healthy growth rates above most other countries, at least large countries nowadays, has difficulties in absorbing the young workforce into the labor market. Is that also part of the things that you look at when it comes to talent, migration and related issues?
Absolutely. And I think India is a fantastic example of how in a globalized world, supported by technology, we can bring together talent. And you're talking about, yes, migration and bringing people abroad, for example, to Germany, to the US. And I think this is one option. And I believe that we need to have also political clarity on how we want to organize, how we want to facilitate, how we want to welcome these people and make sure they can access the labor market, but also have a good living, feel at home. That is one. I think there is also the other option, is how do we do work from elsewhere? And in Accenture, we have huge competence centers. We used to call them delivery centers, but they are much more. They are centers for innovation with excellent engineers coming from Indian universities. And we have built centers of excellence for innovation, for technology, for advancement, where we actually integrate these teams into the work we deliver for our clients from across the globe and make sure we access all these talent pools. And it's not necessarily about moving people. It's also about moving work to where the people are, and not only, moving people to where the work is. And I think this is important, and it will also help us to have a more diverse view on things, on how we approach challenges, and have absolutely access to these talent pool. It's vital. I think it's one of the key components, or many companies is accessing talents from all across the globe. And by the way, not only India. There are also other pools like the Philippines and many others where, you can build centers of excellence.
Of course. Africa as well is talked about less, but it's also obviously a very young and growing continent.
Absolutely. Or look into South America, Middle America, where there is Latin America, where there is a lot of young talent and there is a lot of opportunity to build centers of excellence, to bring education, and by the way, with that transform society, bring wealth, bring stability. So I think that's also a responsibility of the companies investing in these countries, and can be very much a win-win situation for both parts.
So I assume from what you just said about talent management, talent recruitment, that you're not foreseeing that artificial intelligence will make us all superfluous and we can all go to the beach and chill because some chatbots will do all the work for us.
I think the work will change. It will be a massive transformation in how we work. Just imagine today you're maybe a bioscientist working in a pharmaceutical company. So in the future, there will be a lot of testing and experimentation you do today, hands-on, will be done based on synthetic data. So you might become, yes, a bioscientist, but at the same time, a data scientist that actually does a lot of that testing in a virtual environment. Or you are a sales executive today and you travel and you have to prepare for meetings. And maybe you spend more time on preparing your sales meetings than actually talking to your clients. If all the preparation can be done by Gen AI, you can focus a lot more on the people. You can be an advisor. You can be a product developer at the same time. So I think we will not be superfluous. The work we do will change. And I think we should never forget that the responsibility for the decisions we take will remain with humans. So I think being focused on that will be one of the big jobs, challenges, interesting tasks we will have as humans.
Could that also change a little bit the profile or the qualifications that we need in humans, to the point, actually a friend of mine commented or said that to me recently, that interestingly enough, the rise of technological capabilities through, for example, artificial intelligence, they may make technological or technical qualifications less important. Because you said it, we don't need coders that much anymore because the coding will be done automatically or semi-automatically. And interestingly enough, maybe people with a background in humanities or all those things that were in the past were in less demand, at least in terms of monetary salaries that people could fetch on the job market, they may rise. Is that something that might happen?
I think so. So I just had a conversation with one of our experts a couple of days ago around programming languages. And he asked me what will be the most used programming language in the future. And there are many, and I'm not an expert, but huge discussions, which are the best one, the most sustainable ones. And I was like, maybe this and that. And I said, no, it will be English. Plain English.
Yeah.
And this is because Gen AI, by what it is designed to have a natural language interface. So exactly what you say. You might call it prompt engineering, by expressing what you need, it's being translated into like a technology language. And you wouldn't maybe even care what it is. You don't have to learn that language. Still, I think we will need, of course, expertise, because we have to understand the technology that does all the work for us. So that will continue to be important and will continue to be very interesting jobs, because they will deeply influence of how we work, how we live, maybe what we think. So this is important. At the same time, what we will need more is people who create a narrative, have a view, have a strategy, can create buy-in of where a company needs to go to, defines teams, themes, and identifies where to apply technology and where not to apply technology. And as you said, this might be completely different profiles, coming maybe less with a tech background, but with experiences from a very diverse background. So I think diversity will become even more important than today in shaping this world for the future that is driven by a lot of technology things, but in the heart needs to be human. That's at least what I'm convinced of.
You said that in the future, English will become will be the predominant programming language, not Python, not C, not whatever is out there today. Now, some people will say when they hear that, we will all get dumber because we don't understand that much more the intricacies or the underlying ways in which these things function, and it would be much better if we had like a full understanding of how the things work. Now, there are other people who say, well, this does not apply today either. How many people actually know or fully understand how the car works that you maybe take every day to work? We don't, but we still operate it. So where do you fall on that? Do you see a risk of young people becoming dumber than maybe previous generations were because they have ChatGPT to write their homework or to answer any question that they may have?
I'm not in that team of telling people that the young generation isn't clever or will get dull because the technology we use. Absolutely not. I think still we need to apply technology in a responsible way, which means it has to be transparent. For example, how we judge things. You apply for a credit, loan. What's the decision criteria? Why do I get it or don't get it? You will want to have transparency. You will want to understand whether an information is true, it's been checked or not. So I think we need to establish, you call it audit, some kind of quality check that we all rely on. And by the way, today we do the same. We have a lot of quality checks on technical products we use and we trust. Like you told about the car, but also machinery we use, home equipment we use all the time. So I think there is definitely some thought that needs to go into how do I use responsibly all these new technologies and how do I quality stamp and create the transparency. At the same time, I think there is the education. So how we at school, starting from small children, how we talk about technology, how we use media, how we check information needs to become a basic skill, like reading or writing. It needs to become a basic skill to be savvy in using these technologies and judging information. I think there's something that needs to be very much integrated in how we look at education in school and how we talk to children at home in families and create that awareness.
Christina, one of the fixed segments we have in this show is
Executive Briefing, what you should read now.
Where we ask our guests to recommend to our listeners a few things that they could follow up on, things that they could read if they want to dive in a little bit deeper than we can in this one episode into the topic of today. What would you recommend?
Well, if it's about daily information, and this is a podcast, so I'm going to podcasts that I like and that I follow on a regular basis. One is more on what's happening on a daily basis, and I think it's super efficient. I'm listening every morning as I walk to work, to my office, is the Handelsblatt morning briefing. That is a 10 to 15 minute crisp summary of what's happening. So I arrive at office and I'm well informed. And the other one that is a bit deeper is a new podcast I like a lot and I recommend is coming from Deutschlandfunk. And it's called Crashkurs. Wirtschaft trifft Geschichte, so economy meets history. And they talk a lot about some of the change that is happening today, but is not unique, happened before. And how in the past we have solved hyperinflation, problem like housing shortage. It shows us how we have solved these problems in the past, what we can learn also from mistakes, things that worked. And that shall give us a bit of confidence and courage to tackle some of the problems we are looking at today, because we've solved similar problems, and that shall give us some confidence.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll put those two recommendations in the show notes. Obviously, I suppose that both of them are in German. So as a caveat to our listeners, if you don't understand German, then that may not be for you. But nevertheless, I think great recommendations, especially the second one. I'm very curious. I did study history at one point, among other things. So I'm very much a fan of the idea that we can learn how to shape the future by looking at the past. So that is wonderful. And obviously, being two podcasts, we are fans of podcasts here for obvious reasons. So I think that is great. Let us look a little bit further into the future. So we talked a little bit about 2023, 2024, obviously technological change being front and center. What do you think if we look ahead in 2025, maybe 2026, and I'll ask a further question in a moment. What do you think are the upcoming things there when you prepare the pulse of change for those years? Will we still talk about technological change? I suppose yes, but will there be other things that you see coming into the forefront?
I think one thing is that we don't foresee any slowdown in the change. So change is here to stay. I think we stay on a factor level. So six components. And I think they are pretty universal, and they will allow us to cover very, very different trends and changes. So, for example, within technology, yes, Gen AI is here to stay. But there is also quantum coming, quantum computing. The space is coming as another technology. New materials will be coming. Something at the interface between bio and technology. So completely new things. So this is, I think, the 6 areas will be pretty consistent. Within that, we will see new change. At the same time, I think some of the change that we've seen in recent years has just begun, and we will start and see an acceleration. So if we look into some topics like the boomer generation retiring, I mean, this has just started. It will go on. So the gap between demand and supply in talent and resources has just started. It will accelerate, at least, as we said, in the Western world, and you rightly added China to the list. Like environmental change, global warming. I mean, unfortunately, we are just seeing the beginning. I think this will continue, even if we now put a lot of measures. So I think we will see a continued trend in many of the themes and trends we see today. But obviously, there will be some shift, for example, as I said, in technology, where we will see even new things coming up and bringing even more change and more things we have to reflect on, adapt to, and take opportunity in.
And that has brought us already into our second fixed segment.
A bold prediction, the world in 10 years.
So maybe we could just continue. I know that it's hard to foresee things, especially if they involve a lot of change. But what would you say if we were to meet again in 10 years' time? How would the world look like along the things that we've discussed here in this podcast so far?
I think a lot of the change in 10 years has unfolded. So the way we work and live and how we integrate and use technology will have changed completely. So the human-machine interface will become so natural for all of us that we even don't feel it. It's become like this is our way of living, and we will look back to today and say, oh my God, we just scratched the surface back then, and we didn't really understand what it could be. And I think we will have a lot of iPhone moments, as we often say, where we start seeing a trend, but we were not able to see what it deeply means for our society and the change we'll go through. I'm fundamentally positive, and I think it is for us to shape the future. We see a lot of change, but what the world will be, is not happening and defined by, someone. It's being defined by us in taking the responsibility and shaping the future. So this is how I look at it and how I'm positive that we can make a positive impact about all the trends we see today.
So maybe if this podcast is still around in 10 years, maybe we can meet again and we'll listen to some of the things that we've discussed today. And we will probably laugh about some of the naive things that we thought, were innovative and how far we've come in those 10 years.
I agree. It will be great fun, by the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe we'll put something in the outlook already for in 10 years' time. So what we've learned, I think, today is that change is indeed there. It has become faster. It's likely going to accelerate even further, but it can be a positive driver of change for the good. And I like your positive attitude, your positive message. But I think what is also the message here to all those who have responsibility for their companies, for other organizations, for our society, maybe if you're in government, you have to stay on top of things. You have to prepare for those and you have to embrace the change and try to actively shape it in I think you called it in a human-centric way. And I think that is a very nice way of putting it. Technology in particular, it's not an end in itself, but it's a means for us to achieve better living, better quality of life for all of us. Christina, we've come to the end of this episode. That was a very interesting conversation. Obviously, we'll also make sure that we'll put a link to the Pulse of Change from Accenture on our show notes. And obviously, it's very worthwhile to check those pages out. A lot of interesting information that you can find there. Christina, thank you very much for being a part of this show here today.
Thank you.
This was another episode of the Business Diplomacy Today podcast. This podcast is presented by the Indo-German Center for Business Excellence. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe to it on your favorite podcasting platform. And of course, we would also be delighted if you would leave a review or a rating there. You can also go to our website at businessdiplomacy.today to check out the show notes of this episode. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening.